All right, we're about to dive into a pretty radical idea from a book written way back in the 17th century. And the idea is this. What if our worst experiences aren't just things we have to get through, but things that can actually actively work for our good? I know, it's a challenging concept, so we're going to break down the logic behind it. So let's just start with a question that might feel, well, a little nuts, maybe even a bit offensive at first. Can the most painful, difficult things we go through, I mean, the stuff we wouldn't wish on our worst enemy, somehow end up being for our benefit? It's a huge claim, and it's the central idea we're unpacking today. And this whole idea, it's built on this one single, really audacious verse from the Bible. And the claim it makes is absolute. It's not some things, not even most things, but all things working together for good. That's the kicker, right? And that brings us to our guide for this whole explainer, a 17th century minister named Thomas Watson. This guy took that one single verse and wrote an entire book, just unpacking its logic, because he was so convinced it was a promise you could take to the bank. And here it is, the book itself. Watson's goal was to create what he called a cordial. Now, think of that as kind of like a strengthening tonic for the soul. It was meant to be the source of deep comfort, especially when life feels totally out of control, because it's rooted in this idea that for a believer, nothing can ultimately harm you. So let's start with the easy part of his argument. I mean, it's pretty intuitive, right? It's a no-brainer to see how good things work for our good. Blessings, moments of joy, having friends who support you. Of course, that all makes life better. Watson lays out a few examples. He says getting good things should make us humble, not proud. That promises in the Bible are like fuel for your faith. Prayer is how you find some peace, and community, well, that's your support system. It all just makes sense. But this is where it gets really interesting and a whole lot harder to swallow. What about the truly awful stuff? What about pain and temptation and our own failures and just the evil that we see in the world? How in the world could those things possibly fit into this all things for good framework? This is the central paradox, the big question that Watson tackles head on, and he doesn't shy away from it at all. In fact, it's the very heart of his entire book. How can something that is, by its nature, so destructive and harmful somehow lead to a good outcome? And this quote right here brilliantly illustrates his main metaphor. Watson compares God to a master chemist, an apothecary. On their own, certain ingredients are just straight up poison. But a skilled pharmacist, they know exactly how to combine them and balance them to create a powerful, life-saving medicine. And in Watson's view, that is exactly how God works with evil and suffering. So let's really unpack that logic. We're going to look at how Watson argues that hardship and temptation and even our own sins get repurposed by this divine chemist for an ultimately good result. Okay, so first, he completely redefines affliction. In his view, hardship isn't just bad luck. It's not some random accident. Nope. It's a specific tool, and it's being used with intention. As he puts it, an axe can't just cut by itself. A hand has to be guiding it. Watson claims this tool serves three main purposes. First, it's a teacher that shows us what's really going on in our own hearts. Second, it's a purifier, kind of like a goldsmith's fire that burns away all the junk, like pride, to get to the pure metal underneath. And finally, it's a path that prepares us for what's ahead, making us stronger. Now, this is where Watson pushes the logic even further, right into what might be the most uncomfortable territory of all, our own internal struggles. We're talking about our temptations, and even our failures. He argues that even these can be repurposed. Think about it. A really fierce temptation drives you to pray for help. A painful failure can absolutely crush your pride and make you more humble. It teaches you to be more watchful, more careful, but it also makes you way more empathetic to other people who are struggling. And ultimately, it makes you value grace and forgiveness with a depth you just couldn't have had otherwise. So the crucial question is, why? Why would God do this? Why use such painful tools? Well, for Watson, the whole argument hinges not on some kind of abstract power, but on a very specific kind of relationship. He uses these really powerful human analogies. God is like a doctor who gives you bitter-tasting medicine, not to hurt you, but to heal you. He's like a loving father who corrects his child for their own good, or a faithful friend who sticks with you even when things get hard. For Watson, the motivation is always about restoring you, never ever about punishing you. And this brings us to a really critical distinction in Watson's logic. He argues that the very same events in life produce completely opposite results depending on your relationship with God. For the godly, good things lead to gratitude, and bad things are used for growth. But for the wicked, those same good things, they just become a trap for their pride, and hardships, they only lead to bitterness and a hardened heart. The whole underlying principle here, which Watson actually quotes from the theologian Augustine, is this: a being who is both all good and all-powerful just would not allow evil to exist at all, unless they knew they could ultimately overrule it and bring an even greater good out of it. So what's the big takeaway from this 17th century text? Look, it's not some simple promise that everything's going to feel good. Not at all. Instead, it's a complete theological framework for reframing hardship. It's a way to find purpose and meaning even in the absolute worst circumstances, by trusting that a skilled hand is at work. So we're left with this one last thought. If you set aside all the specific theology for just a second, what if you just entertained the core idea? If you were to look at the next hardship you face, not simply as some random, meaningless event, but as a potential tool, how might that change your perspective on it?